Welcome back to The Spirit of Yuletide, a numinous podcast mini-series where we explore European folk magic traditions of the winter season. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, and I'm so pleased you're here for some calmness and creativity and connection through the holidays. In this episode, we're talking about holiday horrors. And while we'll notice the monsters and demons and depravity crop up throughout the season, this year I thought it would be nice to have one special episode dedicated to these characters. So even though they'll come up again in more detail at their relevant times through the season, I wanted to sort of gather them all up for a group picture, just consolidate them for a quick moment and to give a bit more attention than I have in years past to some of them and include some news stories I've never talked about before. And yes, that's right. For folks who are new, this isn't the first year I've had a Yuletide podcast, but for the past several years, it's been behind a paywall. And in fact, when I first researched and wrote this series like 7 years ago, it was just an email subscription. Over time, I recorded the emails so people could choose to listen or read. Then live in-person events for Solstice started happening, and then throughout the whole wheel of the year. Then I took the events online and added even more of them, and a condensed version of these Yuletide traditions appeared in my cookbook, The Spirited Kitchen. So this series is always evolving and iterating depending on my capacity and interests, but this is the first time it's been totally free. So for new folks, you've no doubt noticed already that some parts of the past couple episodes were older recordings. Every year, I update about half the episodes in the mini-series. This year, I'll hopefully have time to update almost all of them, but please forgive any uneven sound quality in some of the episodes where I pull material out of the archive. Mileage may vary in terms of sound quality, I guess. It's sort of like, at times, the digital version of hearing an old gramophone recording. Or, I don't know, maybe not. I mean, I guess I could try to make those sound better, but it's kind of above my pay grade in GarageBand. I just go in, I adjust the compression and the frequencies and the squeeze and all those dials to get it sounding as clear and as warm as I can. But I'm just like pirate radio over here. I do this all myself. And to paraphrase the late, great Nina Simone, I got a lot of living to do before I die, and I ain't got time to waste on GarageBand. Okay, so here we are. On the day this episode drops, it's December 4th, and this is perfect timing for this episode because on December 5th, in various parts of Austria and Germany, we're going to see the Krampuslauf, or the Krampus Run, where Krampus and his menagerie of hooligan helpers will maraud through the streets at night. Krampus is half man and half goat. He's a demon with black fur, bloodshot eyes, disgusting, slobbery, sharp fangs, gnarly horns, and a long snake-like tongue. He carries a birch switch for whipping naughty children and young women, and he sometimes binds them in chains and kidnaps them. Now, over the years, I've read a number of scholarly papers on Krampus, but the standout for me is a 2018 paper by Gertrude Seisser and Matthias Rest, two anthropologists at the University of Hamburg, who studied Krampus groups in Austria over a period of 5 years. I'm going to link to it in the show notes. Bonus for anybody who's interested and has time. But I'll get to the main theme of the paper here in a moment. Part of their research, though, is they needed to get to the true origin of Krampus lore, not just the modern kind of post-internet oral history from the people who dress up as Krampus and other modern folklorists. So they wanted to see if they could verify the origin stories that are commonly reproduced today. What they found, with multiple citations to back this up, is that Krampus, as we think of him today, does not have ancient pagan roots and is not pre-Christian. Krampus is likely at the very earliest from the Renaissance, with the first written record appearing in 1582 in Bavaria. Thereafter, in the 17th and 18th centuries, there are multiple references, but never did they use the name Krampus. They refer to these demons instead as the Perkt or the Perkten, which we'll turn to in a moment. Now, In the past, Krampus and St. Nicholas would usually go door to door together with an entourage of like a couple angels and a half dozen other demons. That was kind of the gist of a Krampus run. So the connection between Krampus and St. Nicholas isn't that hard to parse, really. The Christian St. Nicholas is understood to be the 4th century bishop of Myra, whose feast day is December 6th. So roping some Christian devils into the service of a great saint kind of makes sense in that pantheon. It's not until the 1730s, when we see Jesuit plays about St. Nicholas during the Counter-Reformation, that we begin to hear of the Krampus character as being more like a shadow aspect of St. Nicholas, this figure who not only punishes bad children, but attacks revelers, punishing them with beatings for their moral failure, and uses the threat of sexual violence to intimidate women. Okay, so we're in the mid-1700s now, the start of the Industrial Revolution, and we know that the next 100 years is as much the era of mass production of folklore and its urbanized second cousins, advertising and propaganda, as it is about the mass production of goods and services. And after a century of mass dissemination of information products like books, magazines, catalogs, postcards, greeting cards, posters, decorations, music, radio, photography, and more, now by the time we get to the late 1800s, the next wave of proliferation of Krampus runs. Well, now we're getting close to World War I. So, it's kind of like if Godwin's Law was a holiday board game. Remember that board game Yahtzee? If you roll 5 dice the same, you yell Yahtzee. Well, in this anti-fascist holiday podcast series, if you get a folklore tradition within 100 years of a Great War, you yell Nazi. Because once again, my friends, it turns out that the Nazis latched onto Krampus runs and they framed them as a sort of pre-Christian ethnic German tradition. This served to protect their sense of ethno-purity. Krampus becomes an almost heroic figure, kind of an anti-hero, if you will, one who subversively protects the virtue of the Aryan race by maintaining an ethic of discipline for children. He represses and polices the populace through aggression and threats of violence. He restricts female self-expression and sexuality, literally making it uncomfortable for women to leave the house on Krampus run nights. In the big picture, this, of course, provides cover for actual salacious white male perversion and desire for violence, which you can read all about in Sizer and Rest's article in their paper. And you can read all about how the modern revival of and the modern proliferation in the last couple decades of Krampus traditions across Europe is rooted in white male identity politics and why it has taken on the dull edge of a kind of like make Christmas great again vibe in Europe. Anyway, ho, 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 ho. Let's have a top-up of eggnog and turn our attention to Perkta as a slightly more authentically folk precursor to Krampus. Where Krampus heralds the beginning of the holiday season, Perkta tends to appear closer to the new year or just after. Perkta originates in the Alpine regions of Austria and Germany sometime in the Middle Ages. Now remember, the Middle Ages is that 1,000-year period from about 400 to 1400 Common Era. So she's quite a bit older than Krampus, but still not pre-Christian, technically not pagan, but we're not splitting hairs here. Perkta is a really interesting crone character. Like pretty much all crone figures of folklore, she has a dual nature because, in fact, she represents nature itself. So at times she's depicted as helpful and even one who distributes abundance and gifts. But she also performs a disciplinary role. She socializes children and teaches them what's appropriate behavior and what won't be tolerated. She tests our character and then doles out rewards and punishments. Sometimes her face is bright and warm and maternal, and other times she's dark and gloomy, foreboding and forbidding. She's the sun and the moon, night and day, beautiful and ugly. But at the core of her mythology, Perchta is mainly concerned with the welfare of the earth on a grand and even impersonal scale. She's seen as a personification of a more philosophical tension between good and evil as forces of nature, rather than the personal moral code both flouted and imposed by Krampus. And because of her dual nature, Perchta sometimes seems to be a bit, let's say, morally ambiguous. And we'll hear later in future episodes about just how harsh she can be. Now let's travel to Iceland and hear about Grilla, the cannibal giantess, and her Christmas cat, and her 13 sons known as the Yule Lads. Stories about Grilla come to us through the epic sagas of the Norse poets and bards. As early as the 13th century, Grilla is described as being an ugly giantess with 15 tails who eats her ex-lovers and even children. In her mythology, she stalks around farmyards, helping mothers by eating their naughty kids. She has 13 sons, known as the Yule Lads, and each of them has some kind of random annoying quality or some chaotic nature. They have names like Candle Stealer, Pot Licker, Door Slammer, Sausage Swiper, Window Peeper, and Doorway Sniffer. And if the Yule Lads didn't eat you themselves, they would kidnap you and feed you to the trolls. The more modern custom, emerging sometime in the 17th century or so, is that the 13 Yule Lads would arrive 13 days before Christmas. So we start to see them make an appearance around mid-December. And they had a cat, the Yule Cat, who was a giant as well, and who also ate people. So mothers were superstitious that they needed to ensure their kids got some new garment before Christmas, lest the Yule Cat devour them. There are stories told, even just from the past century, that during famine or war times, when resources were scarce and the poor were numerous, women would still scavenge wool caught on fences from sheep and take apart worn-out old clothing to re-knit them into socks for their children, so the kids would be protected from the Yule Cat come Christmas Day. So, getting socks for Christmas suddenly feels like quite a blessing, doesn't it, children? Now, let's not forget our two favorite grumpy old witches from the south and the east, respectively, La Befana and Baba Yaga. January 6th isn't just a special day for Perchta in Bavaria, it's also a special day in Italy, the day of Epiphany, when not only the three wise men meet baby Jesus, but also La Befana, and she bestows gifts for the baby. Here's how scholar Leslie D. Johnson told the story of La Befana in a really cool journal I found from 1940. Johnston writes, "Her tale is told in many forms and flavors, and La Befana emerges in Italian folklore alternately as a spirit, a witch, a biblical figure, or a kind, if occasionally grumpy grandmother. In the most common version, as the three magi follow their star to the site of Jesus' birth, they stop at the home of an old woman, La Befana, the hag. She waves them on. She's too busy with chores to follow. Soon, second thoughts creep in, and she packs her broom in a basket of baked goods for Mary on the logic that some cleaning and something to eat might go over better than frankincense. But she's too late to catch the Magi, and in her haste she's lifted into the sky to spend eternity soaring in search of the divine child. Just in case, she leaves gifts and sweeps up wherever she might find a child asleep on the night of Epiphany." In an especially poignant telling of the tale, La Befana loses a child to King Herod's massacre of Bethlehem's firstborn sons, and in her grief is blessed as a wandering mother to all children. Man, it is a rough go being a woman in Yuletide stories. Okay, La Befana is a gift bringer who often comes down the chimney to place gifts in the stockings or beside the hearth. Children who send their wishes to La Befana up the chimney on scraps of paper hope to receive fruits, nuts, candy, or gifts in return. As folklorist Stanley G. reports, One hopeful folk song rhapsodizes in support of a cheese-themed holiday, begging the listener to, quote, throw something down to me, a little orange or beffanino or a small piece of pecorino. So cute. The Slavic Baba Yaga is kind of the opposite. At Yuletide, she's known as a gift stealer. Now, Baba Yaga historically has not been a Yuletide or even really that much of a winter figure. She's been more like a threshold guardian between ordinary and non-ordinary reality. Much like Perkta, she has a strong dual nature, representing neither a malevolent nor a benevolent stance. She's simply teaching us about how the world is, at least according to the social order and the times and places from which her folktales emerge. But as such, Baba Yaga is a stabilizing force, an archetypal truth teller, and mirror for society. But cross-cultural mixing between East and West has seen Baba Yaga increasingly associated with the old women of winter, the crones, the witches, the hags of solstice. It's kind of a convenient way for patriarchy to keep older, spinster women who are uninterested in complying with oppressive norms around aging or beauty or behavior, all kind of sidelined and invisibilized and demonized. But those of us who are less fearful of outsider status, who in fact embrace exile status, who would love to be able to exit patriarchal society and live in a mobile hut on chicken legs in the woods, as Baba Yaga does, we are glad to direct our love and devotion to the witches of winter. And then there are the werewolves, the Kalakatsaros. They go by many names and they appear from Greece up through Turkey and the Balkans. But you know what? I think I'm going to save them for their moment to shine on December 23rd. The last stories I want to share are not actually about a monster, but have their own little dash of gore, just like a little soupçon of holiday horror. And that's the legend of St. Lucia, which comes up before our 12 nights of Yuletide. St. Lucy's Day is December 13th. So I wanted to get in an episode before that with just a little bit about her. And so, yeah, maybe a content note here, and maybe I should have done one already. You wouldn't normally think that one needs a content warning on a holiday Yuletide themed podcast miniseries. And I don't know if it's just me being a Scorpio that I don't really think about how some of this content is not exactly family friendly. I didn't really think of it until this episode. But I mean, it is family friendly, for the most part. But is it though? I don't know. Okay, I don't know if this is family-friendly fare, but I do believe there are important lessons in all the scary Yuletide stories. It's just the lessons are not always what they seem. The lessons are not always what they purport to share, because the lessons are actually about patriarchy. That's what's really scary. But okay, I'll also admit that there should be a bit of a content note on the miniseries for, occasional violence, perhaps occasional swearing. I don't think I have yet. Also, maybe a content warning on academic jargon and sometimes just plain tedium, especially when I go on a tangent, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, all that said, let's talk about Nazis. So, St. Lucy. St. Lucy is a bit of a nebulous figure with many roots in many places. In Norwegian folklore, Lussi, spelled Lussi, was a female demonic figure who was part of the Wild Hunt, the furious horde of the restless dead who roam the countryside at night in the weeks leading up to the winter solstice. Lussi, in particular, wandered around on December 13th with a cadre of the dead who climbed out of their graves, and they would check to ensure that people were prepared for their holiday festivities. And by people, I presume they mean women. Man, can we not get a break from all this pressure to make Christmas perfect and put Christmas on? Damn. Anyway, Lussi was especially drawn to any activity that had a circular motion, like spinning, milling, stirring for baking and cooking, etc. Now, in the 1930s, wait for it, an Austrian academic named Otto Hoffler wrote a book called The Cultic Societies of the Germans. Now, he was the one who connected the dots between the modern mummer traditions of his day, that sort of raucous house-to-house door-knocking and costuming and masked traditions as parades. He connected all that to the old folk stories about Lussi and Perkta and the Wild Hunt and these old myths. And he connected this to an ancient Germanic tribal society that today we think of as the heathens, whose patron saint was Woden. And through this work, Otto Hoffler became, or Hofler, I think I'm saying his name wrong. Anyway, Hofler? Anyway, he became a very famous researcher and lecturer at the University of Vienna. And so his work on early German culture and mythology and folklore was foundational for, guess who? Nazis! Yes, because he was a Nazi. So we need to take his research with a bit of a grain of salt, don't we? Anyway, patriarchy distracted me again. Back to Lussi. So today, Lussi, with two S's, has sort of given way to Lucy, like Lucy with a Y, the Saint Lucy, who is a blonde-haired Scandinavian girl who wears a white robe and has a crown of candles on her head. And this version has been imported by way of Germany, we think, as recently as the 1920s. Like before the 1920s, St. Lucia was not that big a deal in Sweden, it turns out. And there's actually a German tradition that may have been the precursor to the St. Lucia tradition from Sweden. Anyway, in Germany, this similar tradition had a girl dressed in white with a wreath of candles on her head, kind of an oddly specific coincidence, but her name was Christkind, and she walked around handing out gifts as an alternative to the Catholic St. Nicholas, and she was meant to symbolize the baby Jesus. And she also brought with her a boy named Hans Trapp, who was kind of like a devil figure. Like, again, can't we just have nice things? Do we always need a guilt trip with it? God. Anyway, okay. Originally, December 13th is actually the feast of St. Lucia, who was a real Italian Catholic martyr from Syracuse on the island of Sicily, who lived in the 14th century. And she is considered the patron saint of the eyes and of the blind. And she is often depicted carrying a platter of eyeballs because Lucia was a pagan Roman who converted to Christianity, and she chose a life of chastity and devotion. And in one version of her story, a man sees her and finds her quite fetching, quite beautiful, beautiful eyes, and pledges his love and asks for her hand in marriage. But she has pledged chastity, so she's like, oh, you like my eyes? You can have them, creep. And she gouges out her eyes and serves them to him on a platter to make herself undesirable for marriage. Like, she really knew how to commit to the bit. Another version of her story is that she, of course, at that time is being persecuted for being a Christian. And in that version, it's a soldier who gouges her eyes out before execution. But then the miracle that made her a saint, right? To become a saint, you had to perform a miracle. Anyway, the miracle is that her family finds that she has her eyes miraculously restored to her body when they go to bury her. So, good story. Okay, let's finish on a sweet note. Tomorrow will be December 5th, and in Germany and the Netherlands, children will be putting their boot outside, perhaps their wooden shoe outside, so St. Niklaus or Sinterklaas can put candy and coins in them. And some of the kids are going to be dressing up and going door to door with a basket, knocking on doors and singing a song to get candy from neighbors, just like Halloween. So fun. Like Christmas, Halloween sounds awesome. So I wish all of the kids of all ages a safe and fun night. Good Yule to you. Until next time, take care.